first morning was a disaster. Tunde woke up to the sound of a baby crying, pots clanking, and his wife, Amaka, snoring peacefully beside him. For a moment, he thought it was all a dream. Then, reality hit him. Today was the first day of their challenge, swapping parenting roles for 2 weeks. He groaned. "This was your idea," he muttered under his breath, dragging himself out of bed. Amaka always handled the kids. She made breakfast, packed their school bags, bathed little Dara, and somehow managed to keep the house from turning into a war zone. Tunde, on the other hand, was the provider. He worked long hours, paid the bills, and thought he was doing enough. But Amaka had laughed when he suggested that staying home was easier than his job. That's how this bet started. 2 weeks. He would do everything she did. She would take his place, handling finances, fixing the car, paying bills. It sounded simple. Until now. Dara's wail grew louder. Tunde sprinted to her crib and lifted her awkwardly. "Shh, Daddy's here," he whispered. She didn't stop crying. "Milk?" He had no idea how much to give her. His hand shook as he tried to scoop formula into a bottle. Half of it spilled on the counter. The baby screamed louder. "Tunde, hurry up!" Amaka's voice rang from the bedroom. She was supposed to sleep in and enjoy her new life. But apparently, that wasn't going to happen. He shoved the bottle into Dara's mouth. She sucked once, then pushed it away, milk spilling down her chin. "What's wrong?" he panicked. "Why isn't she drinking?" Amaka appeared at the doorway, arms crossed, amused. "It's too cold." Tunde's face burned. He ran to warm it up while Dara's screams echoed through the house. And that was just the start. By the time he got Dara settled, the other kids were awake. 7-year-old Chidi sat at the dining table scowling. "Where's my breakfast?" Cereal?" Tunde suggested. "No, Mommy makes toast with eggs." Tunde sighed. He turned on the stove, cracked an egg, and the shell fell straight into the pan. "You, Daddy?" Chidi groaned. 15 minutes later, smoke filled the kitchen. The eggs were black, the toast was burnt, the baby was still fussy. Amaka walked past in Tunde's work clothes, sipping a cup of tea like a queen. "Rough morning?" she teased. Tunde glared. "Not funny." She kissed his forehead. "You'll survive." Then she grabbed the car keys. "Good luck." Tunde wanted to beg her to stay, but pride wouldn't let him. By the afternoon, he was exhausted. He had changed 5 diapers, cleaned up spilled juice twice, and nearly tripped over a toy car. Chidi had thrown a tantrum because he couldn't find his blue socks, and Dara had somehow managed to put a whole crayon in her mouth. How did Amaka do this every day? He sat on the couch, rubbing his temples. Then he looked around. The house was a mess. He still had to make dinner. The kids were fighting over a toy. Then his phone rang. It was Amaka. "How's work?" he asked, forcing a smile. Silence. Then she sighed. "I hate it." Tunde sat up. "What?" "This job, the stress, the pressure. I didn't know it was this hard." She sounded exhausted, just like he felt. Maybe they had both been wrong. Then came the twist. "Tunde, something happened today." His stomach tightened. "What?" There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "I think I made a mistake with the money." Tunde's heart pounded. "What kind of mistake?" Her voice broke. "I paid the wrong account." Silence. Tunde felt a cold chill. "How much?" More silence. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "All of it." Tunde's breath caught. "The entire account? Rent, bills, the kids' school fees, gone?" "Amaka, tell me you're joking." I'm not," she stammered. "I was trying to be quick. The office was busy. I didn't double check." Tunde closed his eyes. His heartbeat roared in his ear. How could you be so careless? He clenched his fist. Shouting wouldn't fix anything. Can we get it back? I don't know. Tunde's mind raced. He had never let something like this happen. He had always been careful, and now, because of a stupid challenge, they could lose everything. He rubbed his face. I'll fix it. How? I don't know yet, he admitted. He hung up. Dara started crying again. His hands trembled as he picked her up. His whole body felt hot. Anger, frustration, fear. This wasn't a game anymore. Then Chidi tugged at his sleeve. Daddy, can we play now? Tunde stared at him. In the chaos, he had forgotten. He promised to play football with him today. Chidi's eyes were full of hope. Tunde swallowed hard. How was he supposed to be a good father when everything was falling apart? Then came the knock on the door. Hard, loud. Tunde's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. He opened the door. A man stood there wearing a black suit. His face was blank, unreadable. Tunde Okafor? Tunde hesitated. Yes? The man handed him a letter. Official notice. Then without another word, he turned and walked away. Tunde stared at the envelope in his hands. Slowly, he tore it open. His hands started shaking. His heart stopped. His eyes darted across the page, reading the words that sealed their fate. Notice of eviction. The air felt thick, heavy. No, this couldn't be happening. His knees went weak. From behind him, Chidi's small voice broke the silence. Daddy, what's wrong? Tunde couldn't speak. His worst nightmare had just begun. As he turned back into the house, he knew one thing for sure. This challenge was about to destroy everything. Tunde's fingers tightened around the eviction letter. His vision blurred as he reread the words, hoping, praying that he had misunderstood. But the truth was clear. They had 2 weeks to vacate the house. The weight of it crashed over him like a wave. His breath hitched. His throat felt dry. Behind him, Chidi tugged at his shirt again. Daddy? His voice was softer this time, unsure. Tunde forced himself to turn around. He plastered on a weak smile. Nothing, son. Go play. Chidi hesitated, eyes flickering between Tunde's face and the letter in his hands. But he nodded and ran off. Tunde shut the door and leaned against it, exhaling sharply. His phone buzzed. Amaka. For a second he wanted to ignore it, but he knew she was probably sitting in her office, drowning in guilt. He answered. I just got a letter. His voice was cold. Silence, then a shaky breath. What kind of letter? Eviction. A strangled gasp. No, Tunde, no. It's happening, Amaka. His voice was flat, empty. We have 2 weeks. A muffled sob. For the first time in years, Tunde heard fear in her voice. Real fear. I'll fix this, she whispered. Tunde almost laughed, but it wasn't funny. How? I'll go to the bank. Maybe they can reverse it. Tunde closed his eyes. Go, try. But deep down, he knew how banks worked. Once a transfer was processed, reversing it was nearly impossible. He hung up and sank onto the couch, head in his hands. Then a small voice spoke. Daddy? He looked up. Chidi stood in the doorway, clutching a toy car. His face was serious. You're sad. Tunde blinked. He forced a smile. I'm okay. Chidi tilted his head. Then why do you look like you want to cry? Tunde swallowed the lump in his throat. He reached out, ruffled Chidi's hair. Come here. Chidi climbed onto his lap, resting his head on Tunde's chest. I heard Mommy on the phone, Chidi mumbled. She said she made a mistake. Tunde stiffened. He had tried to shield the kids from all of this. But Chidi was smart. Too smart. Is it a big mistake? Chidi asked. Tunde hesitated. Then finally he nodded. Chidi didn't say anything for a long time. Then he whispered, "Can we fix it?" Tunde felt something crack inside him. He didn't know. He really didn't know. But he couldn't tell his son that, so he whispered back, "Yes," even if it was a lie. The next morning, Tunde barely slept. His mind raced all night. Amaka had gone to the bank, but as expected, the money couldn't be retrieved. They had 2 weeks. He needed a miracle. Then, something strange happened. At exactly 9:14 a.m., his phone rang. The number was unknown. Tunde hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A deep voice spoke. "You need money. I can help." Tunde's stomach dropped. His blood ran cold. "Who is this?" he demanded. The line went dead. Tunde's heart pounded. His fingers trembled as he stared at the phone screen. Who was that? How did they know? He felt like he was being watched. Then a text came through, a single address, and below it, 5 chilling words. "Come alone. Bring no one." Tunde's breath hitched. Something wasn't right, but what choice did he have? Tunde's pulse pounded in his ears as he stared at the message. He knew this was dangerous, knew that no good thing ever started with a cryptic phone call and an unknown address. But he also knew one thing. He was desperate. With shaking hands, he grabbed his car keys. "Where are you going?" Amaka's voice startled him. She stood in the hallway, arms crossed, worry written all over her face. Tunde hesitated. He couldn't tell her. If she knew, she'd stop him. "Just meeting a friend," he lied. She didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes. But she was too tired to argue. "Be careful," she murmured. Tunde gave her a quick nod and left. The address led him to an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. Rusted metal doors, broken windows, a place where secrets were buried. Tunde parked outside and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back. But then he thought about the eviction letter, his children's faces, the helplessness in Amaka's voice. He stepped out of the car. The air was thick with silence. He knocked once. The door creaked open. Inside, a single man sat on a wooden chair, dark sunglasses, a calm smile. "Tunde Okafor," the man greeted. "Sit." Tunde didn't move. "Who are you?" The man leaned back. "A businessman." Tunde's skin prickled. "I hear you're in trouble," the man continued. "I can fix that." Tunde clenched his fists. "How?" The man's smile widened. "A simple job. Do it and you'll have more money than you need." Tunde's stomach twisted. "What kind of job?" The man slid a piece of paper across the table. "An address. Go there, pick up a package, deliver it." Tunde didn't touch the paper. "What's in the package?" The man chuckled. "You ask too many questions." Tunde's heart pounded. He wasn't stupid. This wasn't a normal delivery. But he needed the money. He swallowed hard. "How much?" 5 million naira. Tunde's breath caught. That was enough to cover everything. Enough to save his family. The man leaned forward. "One job, Tunde. No risks, no problems." Tunde stared at the paper. His hands trembled. He had 2 choices. Walk away and lose everything, or step into the unknown. He took the paper. The pickup location was even worse than the warehouse. A small, dingy building in a neighborhood Tunde didn't recognize. He parked a few streets away and walked. Every step felt heavy. His heart pounded. A man stood outside the building, smoking a cigarette. As soon as he saw Tunde, he nodded and disappeared inside. Tunde followed. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and something metallic. A black duffel bag sat on a table. "Take it," the man said without looking up. Tunde hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, he grabbed the bag and walked out. He didn't dare open it. The drive back was the longest of his life. Every car behind him felt like a threat. Every red light, a trap. By the time he reached the warehouse, his hands were slick with sweat. The sunglasses man was waiting. Tunde placed the bag on the table. The man unzipped it, stacks of cash, and underneath, a gun. Tunde's breath hitched. He took a step back. "What is this?" The man's smile didn't falter. "Payment." Tunde's stomach churned. He had expected dirty money. But this? "Relax," the man said. "No one gets hurt. Take the cash and walk away." Tunde's legs felt weak. He should run. He should leave now. But then he thought about Amaka, the kids, the eviction letter. He reached for the money. And that's when the doors burst open. Police, gunshots, screams. Tunde hit the ground as chaos erupted around him. The sunglasses man pulled his gun, but he wasn't fast enough. A shot rang out. He collapsed. Blood. Tunde gasped, heart racing. Heavy boots pounded toward him. Hands grabbed him, yanked him up. "Freeze!" Cold metal snapped around his wrists. Handcuffs. Tunde's world spun. No, no, no. This wasn't happening. A voice barked orders. Officers swarmed the room. Tunde's mind raced. This was a setup. He had walked straight into a trap. Then, through the chaos, he heard something that shattered him completely. A familiar voice. Shaky, terrified. "Tunde?" His head snapped up. Amaka stood at the entrance. Tears streamed down her face. Their eyes met. Horror, shock, betrayal. Then, just before the officers dragged him away, she whispered one word. "Why?" Tunde couldn't breathe. Everything blurred. The flashing lights, the shouting officers, the cold metal digging into his wrists. But Amaka's face, her tear-streaked face, was the only thing he could focus on. "Amaka, The officer yanked him toward the exit. His words died in his throat. "Move!" Tunde stumbled forward, his heart pounding. This wasn't real. This had to be a nightmare. But it wasn't. The moment they shoved him into the police van and the door slammed shut, reality crashed in. He had lost everything. At the station, they threw him into a dimly lit room, a single chair, a metal table. Then, silence. Tunde sat there, staring at the dried blood on his shirt, blood that wasn't his. His mind raced. How did this happen? He only wanted to save his family. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't... The door creaked open. A tall officer walked in, his eyes sharp, calculating. He tossed a file onto the table. "Tunde Okafor," the officer said slowly. "You've been very busy." Tunde swallowed hard. "I don't..." The officer flipped the file open. "Drug trafficking, illegal money laundering, association with known criminals." Tunde's body went cold. "No," he croaked. "That's not... Save it." The officer leaned in. "We've been tracking this operation for months. You walked right into our hands." Tunde's stomach twisted. "This was a mistake," he whispered. "I didn't know." The officer smirked. "You didn't know?" Tunde's hands clenched into fists. "I just needed money for my family." The officer sighed, shaking his head. "That's what they all say." Tunde felt his chest tighten. "Please, I have kids, a wife." "I was desperate." The officer studied him for a long moment. Then finally, he spoke. "You have two options." Tunde leaned forward. "Anything." "One," the officer said, holding up a finger. "Take the fall, prison, 10 years, minimum." Tunde's heart dropped. "Or two." The officer leaned in closer. "You help us." Tunde blinked. "Help you?" The officer's voice was low, almost dangerous. "You were in deep. You met them. We need names. Locations." Tunde's breath hitched. A rat. They wanted him to be a rat. He swallowed. "If I do this, My family? The officer's expression didn't change. We'll see what we can do. Tunde clenched his jaw. His mind spun. Either way, he was trapped. But then he thought of Amaka, Chidi, their home. He had already lost their trust. But maybe, just maybe, he could still save them. His voice shook as he spoke. What do you need me to do? The officer's eyes gleamed. He knew he had Tunde cornered. You'll wear a wire, he said, voice calm but firm. Go back to them. Get proof. Give us something we can use. Tunde's stomach twisted. Go back? After what happened? They'll kill me, he whispered. The officer shrugged. That's the risk. Tunde's hands balled into fists. And if I do it? The officer leaned back. You help us shut them down and we'll cut you a deal. Tunde exhaled shakily. A deal. That could mean anything. But what choice did he have? He looked down at his cuffed wrists. Then finally he nodded. Okay. 2 days later, Tunde stood in front of his bathroom mirror, staring at his reflection. A tiny wire was taped under his shirt, just below his collarbone. His heart pounded. One wrong move, and he was dead. He turned to the officer standing in his bedroom doorway. And my family? They're safe, the officer said, but his tone was unreadable. Tunde clenched his fists. He didn't trust them, but he had no choice. He grabbed his phone and dialed the number. It rang once, twice, then a familiar voice, low, dangerous. You've got nerve calling me. Tunde's throat tightened. I need to talk, he said carefully. A long pause. Then, come alone. The call ended. Tunde's grip on the phone tightened. This was it. The meeting spot was different this time. Not the warehouse, not the dingy building. A quiet restaurant. Public. Safe. Or so it seemed. Tunde stepped inside, every muscle tense. The air smelled of grilled fish and cheap beer. Then he saw him. Sunglasses man. Except this time, he wasn't smiling. Tunde swallowed hard and walked over. The man leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You're lucky to be breathing, he murmured. Tunde sat. His hands felt clammy. I had no idea about the raid, he said quickly. I swear. The man tilted his head. That's so? Tunde forced himself to meet his gaze. I need another job. Silence. Then the man chuckled. You really are desperate. Tunde didn't move. The man studied him, then reached into his jacket. Tunde tensed, but instead of a gun, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. Last chance, he said, sliding it across the table. Tunde hesitated. Then, slowly, he reached for it. He unfolded the paper, and his blood turned to ice. It wasn't an address this time. It was a picture. A picture of Amaka and Chidi, taken that morning. Tunde's heart stopped. The man's voice was soft but sharp as a knife. We know everything. Tunde's hands trembled. The wire under his shirt suddenly felt like it was burning his skin. The man leaned in, his next words sending a chill down Tunde's spine. If you betray us, they die. Tunde couldn't breathe. The officer's words echoed in his head. Your family is safe. But they weren't. They never were. His mind raced. He had walked straight into a trap. Again. And this time, there was no way out. Tunde's fingers clenched the paper so tightly it crumpled. His vision blurred, but not from fear. This was rage. They had crossed a line. Sunglasses man smirked, watching him like a cornered rat. What's it gonna be, Tunde? Tunde forced himself to breathe. Think. He was being watched. The wire was still recording. The cops were listening. If he panicked now, it was over. He lifted his head slowly, masking the storm raging inside him. I just want to work. Sunglasses man leaned back, amused. Then prove it. Tunde's pulse pounded in his ears. How? The man slid a small brown envelope across the table. Inside is a name, an address, and an amount. You deliver it, no questions. Tunde hesitated. What's the problem? Sunglasses man asked, his smirk fading. Tunde forced a casual shrug. Last time, I got caught in a raid. I need to be careful. The man's gaze darkened. Then be careful. Tunde picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than it should. One more thing, the man said, voice dropping lower. If anything, unexpected happens, remember? Your wife and son won't have time to run. A chill crawled up Tunde's spine. Sunglasses. Man stood, patted Tunde's shoulder, and walked out. Tunde sat frozen, the weight of the world crushing him. He was trapped. Back at the station, the officers played back the recording. That's enough, the chief officer muttered. We have them. Tunde's breath caught. So you'll protect my family, right? You promised. The officer held up a hand. We'll do what we can. Tunde's heart slammed against his ribs. No, what we can. You promised. The officer stared at him, his face unreadable. Then without another word, he walked out. Tunde's blood went cold. Something was wrong. That night, Tunde rushed home. The house was dark, too dark. Amaka, he called. Silence. His stomach dropped. He ran inside, flipping on the lights. And his world shattered. The living room was wrecked. Broken glass, overturned furniture, the TV shattered. And on the coffee table, a single note. Tunde, you took too long to decide. We have them. Tunde staggered back, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This couldn't be happening. No. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, dialing frantically. The officer picked up. What? They took them, Tunde gasped. They... Click. The line went dead. Tunde stared at his phone. Then slowly the truth sunk in. The police were never going to help him. He was on his own, and if he didn't do something fast, Amaka and Chidi wouldn't survive the night. Tunde's body shook as he gripped the note. His mind screamed at him to move, to think, to do something. His wife, his son, gone. And the police? They had cut him off. He was alone. But if they thought he was just going to sit here and cry, they didn't know who they were dealing with. His hands curled into fists. He was going to get them back. Tunde drove through the city like a madman, ignoring traffic lights, ignoring the pounding in his chest. His first stop was the only person who could help him now, Jide. Jide was a mechanic by day, but at night he was something else. He knew people, dangerous people. Tunde slammed his fists on the garage door. Jide, open up. A moment later the door creaked open. A tired-looking Jide peered out, his face twisting in confusion. Tunde? What? They took my family, Tunde rasped. I need help. Jide's eyes darkened. Come inside. Inside, the smell of grease and gasoline filled the air. Tools clanked as Jide shut the door behind them. Who took them? Jide asked. Tunde exhaled shakily. The same people I told you about. The ones I was working for. Jide muttered a curse. I told you not to mess with them. I didn't have a choice, Tunde snapped. Now they have Amaka and Chidi, and I don't know where they are. Jide ran a hand over his beard, thinking. Then, finally, he spoke. There's one guy. He works security for them, low level, but he talks too much when he drinks. Where? Tunde demanded. Jide hesitated. Tunde, this isn't a game. If you go down this road, there's no coming back. Tunde's voice was ice. I don't care. Jide exhaled. Fine. There's a bar. Midnight. I'll take you there. Tunde's jaw tightened. Midnight felt too far away, but right now it was his only lead, and he would do whatever it took. The bar was dimly lit. loud with the chatter of men who had seen too much of life. Jide and Tunde walked in, their eyes scanning the room. "There," Jide muttered, nodding toward a man slumped over the counter, nursing a bottle. Tunde clenched his fists. They walked up to him. Jide leaned in first. "Evening, Pascal." The man lifted his head, bleary-eyed. "What do you want?" Tunde didn't waste time. He grabbed Pascal's collar and yanked him close. "Where are they?" Pascal sputtered. "What? My wife, my son. Your people took them." Tunde's grip tightened. "Where are they?" Pascal laughed weakly. "You think I'd just tell you?" Tunde's heart pounded. He wasn't a violent man, but tonight he had nothing left to lose. With one swift motion, he slammed Pascal's face against the bar. Blood dripped from the man's nose as he groaned. "Talk," Tunde growled. Jide looked around nervously. "Tunde, we don't have time for—" Pascal coughed, then wheezed. "Warehouse, old shipping yard, River Road." Tunde's stomach twisted. He knew that place. And if they were keeping Amaka and Chidi there, then time was running out. Tunde grabbed Jide's car keys and bolted for the door. "Tunde, wait!" Jide called. But Tunde wasn't waiting. His family was out there, and he was going to bring them home.